Good morning, everyone. This is Wednesday, and it means that we do another live Q&A. We have a little new design for today's video, so let us know what you think about it. And I see that people are slowly starting to pull in. Maybe the best way to start is by, again, introducing ourselves. Alicia, maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself for those people who turn in for the first time.
Sure. So my name's Alicia Harry. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer, and I am part of the team here at Holthe Immigration Law. And this live Q&A is hosted by the Canadian Immigration Institute, which is how we try to get messages out to people about what's new in immigration. We're hoping that it's authoritative, it's relevant, it's timely advice and information that you can get through our law firm as the advice part, but the information is what we're trying to provide through this live stream. And so as lawyers, it's not professional for us to provide advice without knowing enough about your personal circumstances, but we do want to foster communication and good information. And so this is where we host this live every week. Usually Mark is here, but he's sick today, so Igor jumped in and he's helping out. And Igor is our articling student. He is very soon to be a fully fledged lawyer here, and we're rooting for him. That's coming up soon. But we're here to be able to answer immigration questions that people have. And we try to see who has the question that's going to be relevant to the most people. So we're trying to look for questions that many people can benefit from. And if you do have specific advice, so something about what should I do or a very unique situation, for sure you can post it, but most of the time we will say, wait a minute, book a consultation. You're able to slide over to our law firm website, book a consult, and we can learn more about specifically what's going on for you and be able to provide targeted legal advice. So here we're providing legal information.
Right.
So thank you very much, Igor, for helping to host today.
Yeah, no problem. So, yeah, as Alicia mentioned, we look for questions from people who tune in and who are wondering about Canadian immigration. So, write your questions in the chat, and then we will pull all of those questions one by one. For those people who already attend our live Q&As weekly, as usual, we remind that we always have the card open for the Expert Entry Accelerator. It's important that if you think about immigrating to Canada through Expert Entry system, that you are aware of all the details, all of the nuances, and all of the little mistakes that can trip your application. So in that course, in that accelerator, we teach you how to prepare the application and avoid most of the common mistakes. And then if something is not answered in the accelerator, we always host the bi-weekly masterclass sessions. Mark is the host, and so you will connect with Mark Holthe, Canadian immigration lawyer, for 1 to 2 hour long Q&A session within the Express Entry Masterclass community, and you can ask your questions that are not answered in the course. Though I doubt that the course doesn't answer anything. I think it's really comprehensive. But regardless, the link is in the description, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. So if you're interested, please go and check the Expert Entry Accelerator. It was just updated this year. All right, so as we wait for people to pile in, those who join, please write where you're tuning in from, and we'll start by giving shout outs to people. So I'm just gonna move this comment in here, and let's see. I think I need to change the background so that we can see the question a little bit better. It's gonna take me just a second.
Well, Igor does that. Maybe I'll talk about what I know that everybody's going to be talking about. I see Anastasia saying, hey, it's been 2 weeks since the last express entry draw. What's going on? So one of the things that we normally do is start with talking about what's happening in the world of express entry, because most of the volume of applications for permanent resident are coming through those economic categories. And so express entry is one of the big funnels. And right now there's been a whole bunch of shakeups with express entry over the last year. They started doing targeted draws, and they also, as of last month, they have done a CEC only draw, which is the first Canadian experience class only draw that they had done since September of 2021, which is interesting because it hopefully shows a shift that immigration is realizing there are a number of people who have been waiting in Canada. They finished their studies, they were finished their PGWP, and they're desperately trying to transition to PR. So we did have a CEC only draw right before that. So on May 31st, we had that CEC only draw. On May 30th, the day before, there was a PNP only draw. So the government scooped out all the people who had been nominated by the provinces, and then the very next day it did that CEC only draw. But now we've been waiting for, today's the 19th of June, and we haven't had a draw since May 31st. And so maybe Igor, once we do a few shout outs, we can flip over to the EE rounds of invitation and just take a look at what the pool's been sitting at.
Yeah. So I see, Alicia, that we have people from Cameroon, from Calgary, from Greece, from all over the world. I'm sure there are more countries present in here, but we'll let people let us know where they tune in from. In the meantime, let's again shift to our website, and from there we will navigate to rounds of invitations, express entry, and yes, you can see previous rounds. Here is the breakdown of all the rounds that we had, and the last one was May 31st.
Mm-hmm.
So, Alicia,
And Igor,
what do you
maybe.
think? Why do they have this huge gap in between the draws?
Mm-hmm. So in April, like they hadn't done a draw since April 24th, and then people had to wait for over a month before they shifted back to the CEC, well, PNP and then the CEC only draw. And so it's a little bit of a departure from how they were doing the draws before. They were doing a general draw or they were doing a targeted draw, French language specific, transportation occupations, STEM categories, agriculture, and healthcare. So those are the category specific draws. With this change going back to the CEC and PNPs, we're really hoping that that will start clearing out some of the people who've been in Canada who have that high skilled 1 year Canadian work experience. And hopefully those people will have a shot. Because if we look back at that general CRS score, the last one in April 23rd, like a CRS score of 529 is huge. Like you basically have to be under the age of 30, perfect English. Probably you have to have had Canadian education or Canadian employer support under arranged employment. That's going to give you that bonus 50 points and maybe even some French because a 529 is just a gigantic score. So it is really tough right now if you're looking at a general draw. And so on a 522 at that Canadian experience, it hasn't brought down that CRS very much, but it was the first round that they did. So it'll be really interesting to see if they do another CEC draw, what will happen to that CRS score. It should hopefully come down a bit, but of course, because it's been in 19 days, more people have piled into the pool.
Yeah, Alicia, I will copy the link to one of the images that I want to share with our viewers. That kind of reminds me of what you need to do to get an ITA. So when jobs you want to have want you to have 10 years of work experience before the age of 22. So this seemed to be accurate if you want to get an ITA. You have to start young. So you have to learn languages, you have to get skilled work experience, think about your future, and plan ahead. So with this being said, like May 31st, the last draw, and then April 23rd, the last general draw, what would be the strategies that you would advise people to maybe consider to get an ITA in the new realities?
Mm-hmm. And we don't know how long French will still be given all these extra bonus points. If there's a change in government, maybe that will go away eventually. But for now, one thing that we are recommending is if you are able to learn French, learning French gives you a number of pathways under the express entry stream right now because it's giving you bonus points for a second language. If you happen to get your NCLC level 7s all the way across, so in speaking, reading, listening, and writing, if you can get NCLC level 7s, that's going to give you bonus points for the French. The other thing that it'll give you is if you're hitting an NCLC level 5, it might be possible if you can find a Canadian employer who is outside the province of Quebec for them to apply for what's called a mobilité francophone work permit, which is submitted. So the employer has to submit an offer of employment through the employer portal, and then people can change if they have an open work permit, like a post-grad work permit, they would have to do a change of conditions inside Canada to file that to an employer-specific IMP, Mobilité Francophone work permit. So there are some strategies to learn French to buy yourself some more time if you can get those NCLC level 5s. And if you can get NCLC level 7, then that's going to give you a bump up in your CRS scores.
Yeah. And Alicia, I'm also thinking for those people who don't have a shot in getting a high CRS points, CRS score, for those people, they would typically consider provincial nominee programs as an alternative pathway. And we have a huge elephant in the room that we need to talk about. And maybe I can pull up the first question that we have in the chat from you. I'll just pronounce the last name. Sorry, it's going to be easier. From Gohill. How one can get an application in AAIP, which is Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, the provincial nominee program in Alberta, because we can get an application due to higher volume. Maybe we can give a little background what Gohill is talking about.
Mm-hmm. So Mark and I did a live last week, and we dedicated it all to the PNPs and what's going on specifically in Alberta right now. Igor and I are in Calgary. We're all dealing with the water restrictions. Everybody who's in Calgary who's listening may know that our main water feeder main for the entire city broke, and 1.5 million people are having to deal with water restrictions right now. But anyway, so the province of Alberta is under the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program. And back in the spring, so I guess, well, maybe technically the winter, in February, the AAIP shut down AOS, the Alberta Advantage Opportunity Stream. And they also had opened up really, really briefly a tourism and hospitality stream that instantly was filled up. And so what they said was, we're shutting those down. So they just completely shut down AOS. And then all of a sudden, just recently, they said, hey, we're opening up AOS, and we're going to be opening up only a few spots in tourism and hospitality, and only a few spots in rural renewal stream applications, and only a few spots in the Alberta Tech Pathway, which is a subset of the Alberta Express Entry. And they said that they didn't provide any details, and all of a sudden, right before they went live with the opening, they changed the document checklist, and they required now an employer declaration form for AOS. So this all happened. They opened up the portal. It went into a queue system, and I don't know if anybody in Alberta has tried to, or anybody in Canada has tried to book camping in Alberta, but it was kind of like that. You got put into a queue and you were hoping that you would get a spot. And the difficulty is they're only allowing like 430 spots for AOS and 40 spots for rural renewal. So it's very small application intake volumes. And this does not mean that those are the nominations that they're giving out. It just means those are the number of applications that they will allow into the system. And because there was such huge demand when this went live on last week, on June 11th, it basically crashed the whole system. So people were waiting in this queue at line. They couldn't get in. They tried logging in. They couldn't advance the screens. And so they tried opening it up again the next day without very much warning. When Mark and I were on the live, they opened it up at 10:30 on the 12th. And a couple people were able to try to get a spot in the queue and start working on their application. And I've heard from a number of people that even once they're in the system, it seems like they can't continue to complete the fields. So you've got like an alphabet, A all the way down to S, and then you've got like supporting documents at the end for your document checklist. And whenever the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program closes access to the portal, people can't type anymore. You can't advance in your application. And so they just announced recently they will open it up for people who already got in to try to complete their applications. But it is definitely a little bit of a gong show right now. And so we'll see what happens when they try to roll this out again. So the next date supposedly that it's going to be opening is July 9th. But one of the things we were hoping was that they would put updates on their website. It seems like they are putting updates on X rather than their website. And so if you want information, make sure that you're going to the X posts for Alberta, and it's actually through the Alberta Immigration and Multiculturalism X site. So that's where you're going to have the most recent updates from the government on what's happening with AAIP. But I feel for you, Yuvraj Singh, because who knows what's going to be happening with those applications. It is a test of people's patience right now. I've heard from people who are literally sitting on their computers from 9 until 4, finally got a spot, and then they couldn't advance their application.
Yeah, right. So that being said, it was really interesting to see how some people actually tried to submit their application and actually submitted their application, or at least got into the portal on June 11th. And if I was that person who got into the portal, I would run to the nearest gas station and buy a lottery ticket, because we've seen some situations where people had like 20,000 candidates in line before them. And for some people, unfortunately, they would get all the way down to, I don't know, 5 to 3 people before them in line. And for some reason, their browser would crash and they would reappear back at the back of the line. So, Alicia, it feels like it is a lottery right now. Um,
Mhm.
you just really have to bet really hard on your luck. But besides luck, what would be the recommendations that you could give to the candidates, like how they can prepare?
Yeah. And so one thing is to carefully go and review all the program criteria. So if you're looking at AOS or rural renewal or the Alberta Tech Pathway or tourism and hospitality, make sure you really understand what's going on with the AAIP requirements. This has applicability to other PNPs also, right? So if you are looking, if all the eggs in your basket are in a provincial nominee category, each province and each program within that province has slightly different eligibility criteria, um, especially for ones that are employer based. So, like the ones in Alberta right now that need that employer declaration, make sure ahead of time that your employers are on board, that they are willing to support your application. Because with this new rollout, and Mark and I talked about this last week as well, for any small company, for small businesses that don't make more than $400,000 in gross revenue, that have less than 3 full-time equivalent employees, Alberta-based employers are actually capped on how many people they can support in provincial nomination. So it would only be one if that company's been in operation at least for 2 years. If it's a larger corporation, they're making over $400,000, they've got more than 3 full-time employees, they could support more people. But if you've got a smaller employer and you haven't talked to them about this ahead of time, they might not be even eligible to support your PR application. And so keep in mind, other provinces also have other employer requirements in terms of the size of the organization, how long they've been in operation, number of employees, whether they're operating out of, the greater like Vancouver area or the greater Toronto area. So there are size requirements, there are operational requirements and revenue requirements, and also that employer has certain obligations. And so sometimes they just are not willing to stick their necks out and try to support somebody's PR application. So if you're really looking at PNP, you might want to try to diversify and have a backup plan.
Right. Well, that probably would conclude our introduction, which was about 20 minutes long. I apologize for that, but now we know that it's not easy. Time has changed, and the rules of the game have changed a lot. And so you want to try to maximize your CRS score through different strategies that we often talk about in these live Q&As. And if expert entry is not an option for you, you may consider provincial nominee programs, and even there you still might have problems. In the new realities, it's not easy, and it feels, more like a lottery rather than a program where if you meet the requirements, then you can apply. Now, that being said, Alicia, maybe we can dive into the questions, and I encourage those 169 people who watch our live Q&A right now to post their questions so that we can pick and choose between the questions that are more generic in nature. If your question is more specific, asking for a personalized advice, we would encourage you to book a consult, because there's some questions that we just cannot answer with very limited information in the question. So how I propose that we do is we go through the questions chronologically, and then I will be scanning the questions in the chats, and we'll pull some questions from the back of the line, from the front of the line, randomly as we go on. So the first question that we probably will pull is the question from Jazz. So Jazz is asking, is it true that IRCC is removing post-grad work permits completely, even if you have completed 2-year study?
And so, Jazz, there is no final determination on what the government's doing with postgrad work permits right now. So they have said that they are looking at changes to postgrad work permit eligibility. We do know, of course, that the federal government has issued a cap in overall numbers of temporary foreign workers, temporary student permit holders, people who are here on a visitor visa right now. Yeah, so we know change is coming, but they haven't announced what those changes will be yet. So they are making it harder for post-grad work permits to be issued. And one of the things that we expect or anticipate that they will do is tie those post-grad work permits more closely with what are the programs of education and the fields of education and degrees and diplomas that are in demand in Canada right now. And so there was another article, Igor, recently about Canada's kind of looking through all of their educational programs and giving categorizations, which they can then use to dovetail with the NOC, with the National Occupation Classification Codes. And so probably what will happen is when they've categorized all the different programs of study and they've looked at all the NOCs and they looked at what their chronic in-demand job shortages are in Canada, they will probably be trying to incentivize people to apply for those programs of study that are really going to lead to jobs that are really in need. And those people are most likely to be able to get those postgrad work permits if they start changing who's eligible. The other thing that there was a bunch of press about is what's happening with privately funded colleges. And so those are ones where we anticipate, and already they've made changes with the PGWP eligibility for those programs. And so if you go to IRCC website and you look at PGWP eligibility, those are the ones already that they've said, if you're not a publicly funded, you're not on the designated learning institution list as a publicly funded institution, then that is right away where you're going to face problems with ever trying to be eligible for a PGWP as of a certain date. So that's going forward, but it's not for people who are already in the program, because those are recently announced changes.
Right. Okay. The next question is also related to this topic. Is there any speculation on what the changes might be?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and so there were a few changes that got announced almost around the same time. And so, Igor, maybe you can go to eligibility for the spousal open work permit. And so this has changed already. So when we're looking at the postgrad work permit, that is for the principal applicant. What immigration has already done is they are saying only certain people will be eligible to have their spouse apply for the spousal open work permit. And so take a careful look at these rules, and really what they're trying to do is, I think, discourage or reduce the number of temporary open work permit holders that are in Canada, because they now have this temporary cap overall. And
yeah,
maybe Igor was going to share the screen.
so here are the requirements for the new spousal open work permit of international students.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see that the requirements have changed over time. And so if you're applying after April 30th, 2024, spouse of an international student can be eligible for a open work permit if the spouse, the actual
Principal
international
applicant.
student, yeah, is
Mm-hmm.
studying at a master's or doctoral degree.
Mm-hmm. Or in one of these eligible
or in one
fields.
of these. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, you have to make sure that you scan through those requirements right now because, again, as we've mentioned in the beginning of the slide, the rules have changed.
Yeah. Yeah, so for people who are applying for that open spousal work permit now, as of June, the rules changed in April. And so the principal applicant, so the person who has the study permit, the spouse who has the study permit, either has to be pursuing a master's or a doctoral program in Canada under a DLI, or they have to be within, they're doing dental surgery, law, medicine, optometry, pharmacy, vet med, nursing, education, or engineering. So only those bachelor's degrees will allow their spouse to be able to be eligible to apply for an open spousal work permit right now.
Yeah. And Alicia, so Saishant is also asking, is there any chance of getting a second postgrad work permit?
No. So it's always been the case that a postgrad work permit was one and done. And it became extremely confusing because of the terminology that was used during the pandemic. So during COVID, the government realized there was a whole bunch of students who couldn't go back to their countries because of travel restrictions. And so what they did was people who had already a valid postgrad work permit, they did a public policy to allow those people to get a extension, but it wasn't really an extension. It was just a way to be able to stay on a work permit longer on an 18-month open work permit. The eligibility criteria was you had to have a valid PGWP. It wasn't actually an extension of a PGWP. It was a new category of work permit under temporary public policy. Those days are done. So it has always been the case that you get one postgrad work permit. If you do a 4-year or a 2-year diploma and then you stack it with another 2-year diploma, in some cases you're eligible in order to be able to apply for your postgrad when you're done the second series of education. But be careful because if you do a 1-year diploma program and you apply for your PGWP, you're limited to a 1-year PGWP validity duration. So most people, it is always better to have at least a 2-year program because then if you have a full 2-year program, then you are eligible for a 3-year postgrad work permit, which makes a very big difference. The only time where you are eligible to get what's called a recapture of time on your postgrad work permit is, let's say you did a 2-year program and at the time that you applied for your postgrad work permit, your passport happened to be expiring in less than the full 3 years. And your country sometimes doesn't allow you to extend a passport early. In those cases, what will have happened is immigration will have issued you your postgrad work permit to the validity of your passport expiry. And there will be a comment on the bottom saying issued to passport expiry. And if you want to try to recapture the time that you lost after you get your new passport issued, then you'd have to make a special application for that and clearly state and show them that your original work permit did have that issued to passport, end of passport validity comment on it. That's the only way you can really get a recapture of time on a PGWP.
Right. Okay. So we'll move on to the next question from Abrar. And again, this is a little more personal. So we can't give you a definite answer to your question, but the question is, does a person with 497 points eligible for Canadian Experience class has a chance of getting an ITA this year? What do you think, Alicia?
And Abrar, yeah, I mean, this is all gazing into the crystal ball, and we would hope that people, if they do more CEC draws, have a chance at a 497 CRS because that's still a really high CRS. And I saw another comment in there saying, yeah, they did a CEC draw, but come on, it's only at a 522 and the general draw was at 529. And the reason is so many people piled in. Right? We had a big hiatus. We had a big gap in time between those April 23rd draws and the end of May. And again, we're building up another big gap in terms of the draws. So it will be very, very interesting. The timing of and the type of draws are so important because we saw even back when they started targeted draws, if you do back-to-back targeted draws like they did in Francophone eligibility targeted draws, for example, that pulled the CRS way down into like the 300s because they did back-to-back fairly large draws. If they were to do a few back-to-back CEC draws, that would really draw the CRS scores down, and we just don't know if they will do it or not. And so, you know, the best option is to try to keep your options open at this point. Make sure that you have valid express entry profiles. A lot of people still lose points on language. And one thing that I don't think everybody knows is you can write those language tests more than once. You can write an IELTS, you can write the Pearson, you can write the CELPIP. You can choose whichever test has the highest score overall, and that's the one that you use, and you can update your express entry profile. So if you are losing points because you're not maxing them out for your first primary language, then try your best to study and to get your language points up as high as possible.
And one thing that I might add here is you may be eligible for one of the category-based draws. So if you have work experience in one of the occupations that they are actively looking for, let's say you work in constructions or in transportation, or you have agriculture work experience, there is a chance that you might be eligible for the category-based draw, and it's important that you carefully review the knock codes eligible for one of the categories. And then if you have 6 months of work experience in that occupation, then theoretically, yes, you can get an ITA with a lower CRS score, because the category-based draws, typically the CRS score needed to get an ITA is much lower. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe Igor, so I see there's a question by Refuzaman Khan, and they're asking, is there any chance with only 6 months foreign work experience? And so if you don't already meet eligibility for either FSW or CEC, then you're not meeting the minimum eligibility for one of the categories. So you have to meet 1 year of continuous high skilled under any sort of high skilled knock foreign work experience within the last 10 years in order to meet FSW, and you have to meet the pass mark of 67 points. In order to meet CEC minimum eligibility, you've got to have 1 year of high skilled Canadian education. You can kind of cobble together different knock codes, and you can use a 24-month period to find that 12-month period. But you have to have basic eligibility. And then what Igor is talking about with the targeted draws kicks in. So now you have another layer on top of that. The targeted draws is if you also have another 6 months in one of the listed knock codes for one of these targeted occupations within the last 3 years, then that might be a situation where you could actually benefit from that foreign work experience if it's in the right knock. But remember, you must have basic eligibility under either FSW or CEC first.
Right. Alicia, I want to jump all the way to the very beginning of our chat because we have two questions that are very similar. So, first one is from Nash. How does Alberta Opportunity Stream determine if the occupation and post-grad work permit education are related? And how long the documents that you get from your employer are valid for? Let's say you got them in May or like in June, but you didn't get a chance to apply and get in the Alberta Opportunity Stream portal, let's say not until October. Is your document still valid? And then I think it's a very similar question was asked for by Saad. For AUS postgrad work permit, how does your job have to be exactly related to a field of study or similar? So what I think these two viewers are referring to is this paragraph from the eligibility requirements. If you are a postgrad work permit holder, your occupation must also be related to a field of study in Alberta. So what's your take on it?
Mm-hmm. And this is a requirement that also relates to other provinces as well. So other provinces and other programs will start to question you if, let's say you did a diploma in financial management and then all of a sudden you're working in a nursing facility or something like that, right? If they can't understand what the logical correlation is between your education and how you're applying it in your work, then they will question the legitimacy of the job that you're claiming and how you got there. And so the answer to both of these questions is AOS doesn't say specifically how they do it. Alberta doesn't say specifically how they do it. And I'll turn to the employer declaration questions in a second. But in general, try to go through and logic test it, right? If you put yourself in the shoes of an officer who's looking at this application, it's important for you to provide a letter of explanation that says, look, I did my undergrad program in, financial management, and I'm using the skills that I learned in this course, that course, this course to apply them in this job, and here's how I'm doing it. So something like that to be able to connect the dots for the officer so that they understand that it is a legitimate job, that you are using your skills because they also want it to make sure to be high skilled work, that it's not entry level work, and that you are applying those in the work that you're doing in the province actively. So that's one thing in your letters of explanation to do a good job of. The next thing is, it's a very good question. Now that we have this ridiculous lottery system where every month they only open it up and the portal doesn't work properly, and, and things are getting timed out, and really people have very limited chances of trying to squeak in an application. It's a good question. How long are those employer declaration forms or support letters going to be honored by the Alberta Advantage immigration program? They've not said, right? They haven't said if there's an expiry date. Normally, when we're filing applications with our clients, we want those job offer letters and support letters to be recent, right? Normally within the last month. And so it might be a situation where you have to go back to your employer if you manage to squeak into the portal and ask them to send you an updated signed employer declaration.
Okay, Alicia, we've got two super chats, so we'll skip the line with them. So VK is the first super chat, and his question is: Inland Federal Skilled Worker stream got acknowledgement of receipt in January. On June 12th, sent the medical results to IRCC. June 17th, received medical surveillance letter. What are the next steps for the IRCC?
Mm-hmm. And so, VK, one of the things that is part of that immigration medical tends to be the chest x-ray and the sputum test. And the reason that they're doing that is that they're screening for tuberculosis. And so they really want to make sure that tuberculosis doesn't spread within the Canadian population. And so anybody who has something that shows up on the x-ray, on their chest x-ray, or something that shows up in their medical, they will be sent for medical surveillance. So they will try to make sure that there is no active TB, that people are getting medical treatment if there is, or if it's just old evidence of TB, then that it's just being followed on a relatively routine basis to make sure that it doesn't turn into active TB. So that's just something where they normally put on medical surveillance. You've got a reporting obligation to go back to the doctor to follow up to make sure that there's no further treatment required. And as long as that is all checked out and you're following that guidance from your doctor and IRCC, then it's normally not a problem unless there's something else that's actively contagious.
Okay. Then we have another medical question from Super Chat. Applied for permanent resident inland PNP through Canadian Experience class with a blank medical. So, as you know, they changed the requirements now. You don't have to do upfront medical exam. You can just upload a blank piece of paper. Can I do my medical before getting the medical request from RCC and keep it ready? So I think Romano is trying just to ensure that it doesn't take longer to process his application. When RCC sends the request, then he goes to the doctor, then it takes some time. So what if he already has the medical exam? What would be your strategy?
Yeah. And so, depending on country of origin and how complicated, how many family members you have, if you've got a spouse and a whole bunch of kids, if anybody did military service, sometimes there's longer background screening and security checks that IRCC has to do with CBSA. So sometimes it takes longer to process an application. If you already have a medical, or you want to book one to have it in your back pocket so that the instant they send you that medical request, you have it. Or sometimes people do as a strategy is, they submit their EAPR and then they go get their upfront medical after they've submitted their EAPR. And then once they have that information sheet, the medical information sheet, they will upload that as a supplemental document under the web form or the way of providing IRCC an additional piece of information to add on to their application. It's always a bit tricky because once you've submitted an EAPR and then you try to add a document after the fact, and it has to catch up with a file. But you definitely can try to do that. And then once they ask you for the document, they would provide you an upload spot through your portal and you could provide it there as well.
Okay. Yeah. So next question is from Amy. How long does it take once submitted all documents to RCC for Canadian experience class, got an ITA on April and some documents on April 28th to get biometrics request? It looks like the backlog is huge. Any take on that,
Yeah.
Alicia?
Well, and this is something that they don't post statistics on, they don't post processing times on, and so it's difficult to say other than trying to crowdsource the information. And so this is one where, it used to be that the biometrics requests were pretty snappy. They would send them out quite quickly. But if there is a bottleneck, if it seems to be that the biometrics requests are getting backlogged, or sometimes what happens is the processing centers that do the biometrics, sometimes they get booked up in their appointments. I know like last summer, for example, it was difficult to get a passport, depending on how many passport offices were going. And so it's a numbers game sometimes. So I don't have a good answer on this one. You'd have to kind of crowdsource to see other people who submitted an application around the similar time, what are they seeing?
Yeah, and maybe I can also share the story. A client of mine sent his application. I don't recall exactly the month, but I think 3 months later, he sent me a message saying, "Look, I didn't get a biometrics request. What's going on? I just got my acknowledgement of receipt." And I know it's like, it's normally it takes about 1 month, right? But
Mhm.
then we went into his application and it's complete silence. Like nothing has happened on his application since he submitted it. And it's like 3 or 4 months down the road. So I started to get a little concerned. I'm like, maybe his application got to a ghost RCC employee. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, back like last year, I think there was a huge scandal that apparently there were some applications that were assigned to the officers that didn't work for RCC anymore. And so they were sitting in a queue for years and people were wondering what's going on. So I'm like, oh my God, that's going to be ridiculous if this client got to in this situation. And then maybe 3 weeks later, he sends me an email saying that he got his passport request. Or not
Oh,
actually the passport request. He was in Canada. It was e-Coper, portal invitation. And so the conclusion from this story would be that whatever works for one person would not necessarily work for the other. Whatever timeline one person has, it doesn't mean that the same timeline would apply for everyone else. But as Alicia mentioned, you can always crowdsource. And the resource that I use and used when I applied for Express Entry was the image tracker. And so image tracker is kind of a database. Think of it as an express Excel spreadsheet where people register and they just type in their information and type in the dates when they submitted their application, when they paid their fees, when they got a biometrics request, and it has some funky stages like Portal 1, Portal 2 email. I'm not sure how useful is that, but you can see when they got an ITA, when they got the biometrics, when they got the medical request, and so you can project maybe um, how long it's going to take in your situation to get the e-Coper.
and I will add to the overall process serving time. So, IRCC has a process standard, and they say, so yeah, you can go to the website and you can check processing times, and they aim to have all express entry applications finalized in less than 6 months. And right now it's listing a CEC application at 5 months. And that's about accurate from what we've been seeing from our clients, is that most people will have received their e-COPR within about 5 months. And so, still logic check it, just like Igor said. If you're at the 5 or 6 month mark and you have radio silence on everything, then maybe start to try to figure out what's going on with your application. But if you're within that processing service standard and you know that you've completed your medicals and you've completed your biometrics and everything else is done, then it's probably just a matter of them processing. And just like Igor said, it's not like a first in first out system like it used to be. They reallocate those files to whatever processing center around the world has capacity to review them. And they're also doing things like triaging those applications so that if there's a security risk, then that will probably take longer than the average processing time.
Yeah. Um, I'm looking at the question that I just saw a minute ago. I cannot find it anymore. Let's see. Yeah, so maybe I'll just pick a different one. But overall, in the comments, Alicia, there is a discussion among the viewers that the new requirements for the Alberta Opportunity Stream, and we keep coming back to the same topic again and again, that they're pretty cruel. And so I think the question that I saw was, oh, actually, there it is. There it is. What if we don't have the employee declaration form, or if the employer is not ready to reveal the numbers? And then Saishand is adding, big stock market companies will never consider doing that for their employees. They're just too big to care for one individual.
Yeah. And this is a reality. And that's why I said the biggest thing with PNP is double checking with your employer that they're actually on board. And so there's a couple things. And I had a consult yesterday with somebody who works for a large multinational company. And they said, look, like our HR isn't even in Canada. They're in a different company. And I think it's highly unlikely that they will support a employer declaration form. And that might be an unfortunate reality. The reason that Alberta has rolled out these requirements is because of fraud, because of employer abuse or agent abuse of this system. So they really want to know that there is a legitimate company who has a business need for a foreign worker who already employs Canadians who can actually support this job. And you guys are right. Banks, government companies often won't stick their necks out to try to keep a foreign worker because the perception is we need to hire Canadians first. And that's where the whole LMIA system comes in as well. And so there needs to be a labor market test to prove that Canadian companies are doing their best to hire Canadians first. And only if they can prove they can't, really, can they hire foreign workers under the LMIA. For a PNP, larger companies tend to have more legitimacy if they have, if they're publicly traded, if they have a publicly accessible database and website, if they have annual reports, if they produce financial statements for investors. Those things, it's easier for the Alberta government to verify that they're a legitimate company who can support a permanent residence application for a foreign national. But at the same time, if that company is too big and they just don't want to help you, then that becomes a problem as well. If it's a smaller company having to show their wage, like they don't, so Alberta doesn't necessarily say that the company has to provide this documentation up front. What they say in the employer declaration form is an officer might contact the company to try to get tax return information, to try to confirm, to make sure that they have client contracts. And probably they are going to do that when they have fraud concerns, when they're not sure if that's a legitimate employer. And it probably is not going to happen as long as that company has a business, they're operating actively out of it. They have a business license if required. They're a large enough company. They've been in operation for a number of years. So it really depends, but they're checking to make sure that it is legitimate.
Yeah. Speaking about the number of years in operation, so the question from Rogav, I'm on a closed work permit in Alberta, want to apply for PNP, but the employer is not active, has not been registered for 2 years, right? So less than 2 years now. in
Mhm.
operation. What are the options for me? And so maybe Alicia, as you answer this question, I pull up the official requirements
Mhm.
from the Alberta Opportunity Stream website. So the employer must be in continuous and active operation for a minimum of 2 years. And there are some exceptions that allow to overcome the requirement, some of the requirements. For example, if your employer does not have revenue or 3 full-time employees, then 2 year of operation in Alberta is still a minimum requirement that you just cannot go over.
Mhm. And Igor, if you scroll up, so scroll up to the employer eligibility requirements. So the Alberta employer has to be incorporated, has to be in continuous operation for a minimum of 2 years, tax years, and have the ability to show that they've got a place of business where people can report. So it can't be a fully virtual or online business. And they have to provide a demonstrated need for the position. So
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, under the new rules and under this shift in how Alberta is trying to assess the employer, if that company has not at least been in operation for a minimum of 2 fiscal years, so they haven't filed 2 corporate tax returns, then they would not be eligible to support you for a P&P application until they roll into that next, making sure that they've got 2 years of corporate tax returns.
Right. Alicia, let's tackle one more super chat from Ron. How can Mark Miller say that Canada is going to reduce temporary foreign workers to 5% of total population, and the latest count shows we are at 6.9? I think
Mm-hmm.
what Mark Miller said is that he wants to reduce temporary residence applications, not only temporary foreign workers. So a
Mm-hmm.
total. Um, so I think TFW probably would be an accurate acronym for temporary residence, but in general, what?
Yeah, yeah. So keep in mind that anybody who is not a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident is a foreign national. And then a foreign national can be in Canada only if they meet a few requirements. So some of them have to be here on what's called an electronic travel authorization. So if you're flying from, I don't know, England, and you're a British citizen, you wouldn't have to apply for a visa, but you would have to apply for an ETA. Then there's a group of people who are visa required. So your country of nationality means that you have to go get a visa before you would be allowed as a visitor in Canada. Most TRV holders, people who are coming as visitors, are only authorized to stay for up to 6 months, and it could be less. So an officer can look at that application and they can say, I don't know how you're going to support yourself financially for 6 months, given what you've provided in supporting evidence and what your job is. And so we're only going to let you in for 2 months or whatever. So you have a whole body of people who are here on ETAs, people who are here on visitor visas, and then you have students, and then you have work permit holders of various different types of categories. And overall, they're trying to shrink all of those temporary categories of applicants down to that 5% target. So it's not just workers, a lot of those numbers, and I've seen some articles that have provided breakdowns of those numbers. A lot of them are the study permit holders, and a lot of them are the open spousal work permit, but also the visitors. So there's a large contingent of people. And, you know, visitors, usually, if you're coming for a visit, they're probably only staying for 2 or 3 weeks, a lot of people, and then they go back. And so that number constantly shifts. And so if you want to bring down your overall number of visitors, well, it's probably going to mean we're looking at longer processing times on visitor visa applications from outside of Canada.
Yeah. The next question would be from Harpal, and I know Mark uses the bell sound. We don't have that sound, at least I don't. But Harpal is asking, I would like to convert my visitor visa to study permit while in Canada. Can you help with that?
So, Harpal,
Where?
generally, study permit applications have to be made from outside of Canada. Usually, that is the usual rule. And so it is very tricky if you are looking to try to jump from a visitor to a study permit from inside Canada. Normally, it has to be an outside Canada application. And so that is something to keep in mind. But just like Igor said, we can ring the imaginary triangle, book a consultation if you have questions about your situation specifically, and we'll try to understand more about what happened, where you're at, what your education history is. And of course, there are all sorts of new strictures and restrictions on study permits. So the biggest thing would be making sure that you are able to get accepted, a letter of acceptance and a provincial attestation letter, because now similarly, the provinces have a cap on how many provincial attestation letters they can issue, and then that is tied to how many study permits are able to be issued for that province.
Yeah. And Harpal, one page that I would direct you to is the page for how to apply for study permit. And then you have a ticker, so you can select inside Canada, and then it gives you the list of who can apply for a study permit from inside Canada. So if you fit into one of these categories, then there might be some good news for you. But before we can give you a definite answer, we'd ask that you book a consult. The link to our holthelaw.com website is in the description, so you can choose with whom you want to book a consultation, and then you can choose between the 25-minute and 50-minute consult, depending on how much you want to discuss in the call. All right, so Alicia, there was one more question from Abhishek. Can a permanent resident move to a different province if they immigrated through provincial nominee program? For example, he got um, he got his permanent residence through the ONP, and then would he be eligible to move to Alberta if he wanted to do that after he gets his PR status?
And Avishek, I was actually I'd like to do a podcast with Mark specifically on intent to reside because there's been a few recent federal court cases on intent to reside. And this is a real risk that immigration can say, we are going to take away your PR because you are not following through with your obligations to properly reside in the province that nominated you. And so there are a few recent federal court cases where they have looked at this situation. There's one from somebody who was nominated by the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program, and they said, oh, I'll come back to Saskatchewan, but in the meantime, I'm going to go to Ontario. I'm going to rent a house in Ontario because my wife and my kids need to do some things in Ontario, but then we'll come back to Saskatchewan. And they said, no, you guys are not proving that you actually intend to live and settle in Saskatchewan, and we're going to try to take away your PR. So there is absolutely a risk. And so if you have landed in a province that nominated you under a PNP, you have to show best efforts to actually settle in that province. So what were your job searches? How did you try to establish yourself in that community? Did the kids go to school there? Did you have connections to the charitable organizations or volunteer in that community? Did you buy a car? Did you rent a long-term a lease or have a long-term rental for at least a year in that community? How long have you stayed in that community? And can you show that you really made a legitimate go of it? And then only if you can prove that, you know what, you just could not make it work and it's reasonable in terms of the time that you tried, um, it's still a risk, right? So this is something where you have to weigh a number of factors and make sure to take a look at the cases, reach out, book a consult. We can talk to you more about your specific situation.
Yeah. Alicia, two more questions before we wrap up. So first one is from Oluvatobi. And Oluvatobi is asking, what is the possible impact of the new Alberta Opportunity Stream requirements? How it will impact the applications submitted before those requirements were introduced and before they suspended Alberta Opportunity Stream. As we know, they'd taken so many applications that they had to suspend the Alberta Opportunity Stream, and those applications are still pending. And then the other question that is very related, but it asks about the other side of the process. What is the impact? What do you think a US application submitted after new guidelines have chances of being assessed early? Will the new requirements result in faster processing?
And both are really good questions. And the problem is this. The problem is that Alberta is a black box and they do not tell you what is in the box. And when you read the Alberta website, it literally says, we guarantee nothing. We are not even going to necessarily assess your application if you manage to go through this like ridiculous lottery and actually submit it. We don't even guarantee that we're going to open it up and look at it. We
Yeah.
can nominate whoever we want. That's basically what they say. They say we can change program requirements whenever we want, and too bad. And so it's difficult from a program standpoint to predict how they're going to manage this volume of people who are in the queue prior to the shutdown, because there's thousands of applications that are sitting there right now. And hopefully they would grandfather those old applications and not go back to applicants and require them to all of a sudden get an employer declaration form. But we just don't know. It could be, yeah, here are the AIIP terms and conditions. We're not obligated to assess or process any applications. They're all treated as an expression of interest. They're processed according to the quality of the application, the labor market impact, the processing volumes, other factors solely at the AIP's discretion. You acknowledge and you agree that your application may not be processed in the order received or at all, right?
Yeah.
And so this is the problem with Alberta. From a fairness standpoint, we would hope that they would process those applications that were already received in the queue. Sometimes the second question is correct, that sometimes if you have new requirements and you have stronger applications because there's better supporting documents from the employers, maybe Alberta is actually more likely to look at an application that has stronger evidence than an application that's been sitting there for a long time, but they are not giving any guarantees.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about thousands of those people who submitted their applications and who now
Mm-hmm.
celebrate, open a bottle of champagne. Yes, I got in. I will get permanent residence.
Mm-mm.
Not guaranteed. Not guaranteed, my
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Okay, so I think, Alicia, we will wrap this up. It was a good 1 hour, 1 minute, and 30 seconds of answering your questions. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. I see that we have 257 people watching live. And again, I remind that you can always consider booking a consultation with one of our lawyers at Holthe Immigration Law. All you have to do is click the link in the description or just type holthelaw.com and then go to book a consult, and then you can choose with whom you want to connect and discuss your questions. And then for those people who are interested in Express Entry, so we have this Express Entry course, or we call it Accelerator, which is a redesigned 2024 version of the Express Entry video step-by-step tutorial, where Mark explains how to prepare your application and avoid most common mistakes. We have hours and hours of video content. You can see uh, the index, the list of lessons that we have in the course down at the bottom. And so this course is probably your best bet to learn reliable information about Express Entry, not scout Reddit and other forums where people just share their personal experiences that may not be accurate, that those experiences may be over exaggerated, and then whatever worked for one person may not work for the other. Officers make mistakes, and if something worked when it shouldn't have worked for one person, maybe they will catch you this time. So don't take any chances. And if you're interested, yes, subscribe to the course and attend the masterclass, which is bi-weekly live Q&A sessions
Yeah.
specifically designed for the people who subscribe to the masterclass.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to sum up, so we're immigration lawyers, and that is what we do. And we are trying to provide some information to everybody free here so that you have a good source of information with resources. We've got blog articles, we've got lots of podcasts, we've got hundreds and hundreds of YouTube videos that Mark's been producing over the years. Igor's been assisting. I've been with Holthe Immigration Law for the last 4 years as well, and prior to that, a lawyer in other immigration law firms. So we're trying to give the best information that we can for free when possible. For consults when you have targeted questions, and then if you can't afford to hire us, so certainly you're welcome to hire us for a full review of your application, but if you can't afford that, that's why we've created this masterclass for express entry, so that people have a very solid resource to help guide them through, and at least you've got something that's cost effective that is going to give you a very detailed source of information.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next Wednesday.